First, it's good to be back, and it's good to be out of Washington, and I get a few more weeks of this, and I'd like to introduce a few people. First and foremost is my wife and partner in all this activity, Berman, as well as the person who for many years was my chief of staff in Washington, has moved to Los Angeles, not just for the purposes of the census, but has moved to Los Angeles and runs my district office, Gene Smith. I know some of you know her well. And Pearl Ritchie, who's been working with me since 1975. We were both children, and I know many of you know Pearl. And one of our newer staffers is Bethany Brisky. We're back there. So, in the context of many of the different federal issues where one of them or I can help you during or after this is over, and you have an issue you'd like us to pursue, that is one of the things we can do, and sometimes get your concern a little closer to the eyes of the appropriate government official or bureaucrat who deals with it. About it now, driving as I do every week up the 405 and seeing the grading starting in the bridge work, and actually somewhat impressed by at least the effort by the folks who are doing this to let the communities know about the dislocations and disruptions that naturally come with this construction. And in the belief that this particular temporary pain will be worth it, I watched the difference on the 405 just by the widening of the turn to the east on the 101, and how much that widening helped the traffic there to believe that this is one small but important part of that whole plan. Ron Kay, who at that point was with the Daily News, was a tremendous help to us on this project and turning some of our opponents into supporters, and that was truly a Sherman Oaks Homeowner Association project that came to fruition at least 10 years sooner than it otherwise would have happened. I'm going to just touch on a few issues because I have a feeling there's a lot of green paper out there, and I could spend a great amount of time talking about any particular issue. I think it's much better to let your questions drive the conversation. My district, for those who aren't familiar with its current contours, basically goes on the south from Mulholland all the way up to Sylmar, from Encino over to Toluca Lake and North Hollywood, includes communities of obviously Sherman Oaks, but also North Hollywood, Pacoima, Arleta, this whole area. It's a very diverse district. This district and the country as a whole are trying to recover from, I think, the most serious economic crisis this nation has faced since the Great Depression. It's a crisis that I see all the time is causing tremendous misery for many of my constituents. I see unprecedented rates of home foreclosures, unacceptable levels of unemployment, sharp cutbacks in consumer spending, and consumer spending for many years now has driven the American economy, and a banking and invest community that for somewhat understandable reasons is very risk adverse. It's very hard to persuade them to lend the money they now have. There's trillions of dollars in cash in our banks as a result of the actions that were taken. Getting them to lend it out now under prudent and sensible business terms is not so easy. And we could spend a lot of time here trying to explain whose fault it was, why it happened, to what extent did government play, and to some extent government did play a role in creating the policies that led to this economic crisis. I don't think pointing fingers at this point. There's enough blame for all of us, and I mean at the federal level, Democrats, Republicans, the executive branch, the Congress, state governments, local governments, and certainly a variety of actors in the business community that I don't think we should take a lot of this time to examine that. But in the context of this very difficult situation, with very high unemployment, home foreclosures, devastating situation in the construction industry, we have a massive and growing debt, which creates an enormous dilemma for us. Because if we try to deal with that debt with immediate substantial reductions in spending, or massive budget cuts, or implement immediate and substantial and widespread tax increases, there is no question we're going to risk moving this difficult and all too slow economic recovery from a trajectory of economic growth back into a double-dip recession. So, as you think about the debt and the problems and concerns of it, how we approach this is very important. Otherwise, we will kill off what recovery we have, the ability to make it more robust, and we will slip back into a terrible situation. For me, it's just a fundamental dynamic of Keynesian economics. In good times, governments should build up surpluses. In bad times, you stimulate economic activity. We didn't do that in the good times. Now we're in the bad times, and it's a perilous course we're on. But if we simply ignore the debt, we'd only threaten our long-term economic vitality. This whole country is a manufacturing country, is a job-producing country, but we're going to leave our children and grandchildren with really an unbelievable level of liabilities that will really deeply cut even more into the American way of life. So my own notion, frankly, is we try to do both at the same time. We maintain the stimulating activities that can help the economic recovery and some of the programs that were undertaken to do that. And at the same time, you start legislating the phased-in reform of some of the entitlement programs, some very specific, focused on narrow groups, particularly the very wealthiest of our population, phased in and modest tax increases. You restore the estate tax, and I know that's not popular with a lot of people, but you restore it with a significant exclusion so that it only hits a very small percentage of the people, and at a rate that is lower than the rate it was at before it expired. And so you phase in those measures which will reduce the long-term debt because they will build in systemic changes, but you don't jeopardize the current economic recovery any more than the events of the day and of the world are doing. We are in a globalized world. We are massively impacted by it. Just as our fiscal crisis and economic crisis spread across the world, when Europe and the Euro and Greece has a problem, the spillover effects here are immediate and enormous. This is no longer a self-contained kind of economic situation for the United States. It's not the good old days. The Congress I'm part of has made a number of legislative accomplishments. I think they're accomplishments. Some people think they're negatives, but I'm proud of them, and I was proud to support them. I do believe, notwithstanding all the rhetoric, that our health care legislation was very important. It was a very, very large step towards universal coverage, and included at the same time major reforms, which I believe and other independent actuaries are already predicting will lower the rate of healthcare inflation and the long-term healthcare costs of this country.